welcome back to the Inner Sanctum. Today, we are going to do book reviews. Yeah, remember book reviews when you were like in grade school? That was fun. Yeah. But these are not just any book reviews. These are going to be post-industrial book reviews, and zines actually too. So this is an idea that's kind of been floating around in my head for a while now. Probably over a year really, and I just was like, it's time to finally do that, and tonight's the night, as Phil Collins once said. I think it was Phil Collins. Yeah, fuck. Anyway, I'm not gonna dilly-dally around, I'm not gonna talk about my stupid fucking beer. We're gonna get right into it. Let's talk about some post-industrial books. So up first is England's Hidden Reverse, which is by David Keenan. This book was first published in the early 2000s, and I think it was right around the time that I was getting into Current 93, Death in June, Sol Invictus, all that, you know, I guess big names in neo-folk scene. I came across this book. That being about 2002 time frame for me when I got into that stuff, if memory serves me. This book, I think, had just been released, and the original cover this is the second edition, I should mention. The original cover had just basically a collage of photos of people involved in the neo-folk scene. As well, it came with a compilation CD that had tracks from several of the bands mentioned and so on and so forth. This particular book centers around Coil, Current 93, and Nurse with Wound, which are bands I hope you're familiar with. I got my Current 93 shirt on today. Current 93 is one of my all-time favorites, so that was my real motivation for buying this, as well as Coil. Whereas Nurse with Wound is a project that, although I've had a few CDs over the years, I don't know, I just can't really get into what Steven Stapleton does, but maybe it's just I haven't heard the right album yet, and, well, surprise, surprise, like a lot of bands in that scene, he has, like, you know, hundreds of recordings, so where do you start? Well, I don't know. I've been over the project for 20 years and I haven't dove too deeply into it. But I have dove really deeply into the discography of Coil and Current 93, and I love almost all of it, of course. That being said, this book is basically a biography of the three bands. David, he stayed or spent time living with Coil and David Tibet and Steven Stapleton, and got to know them on a really intimate and personal level. And basically, this book is them telling their story of basically their early life, you know, through teens and up until forming their individual projects when they were all, you know, in their early 20s, of course. I guess. Well, I guess Peter Christensen was in maybe his late 20s when Coil started. I don't know. Whatever. But John Balance, of course, was like 20 or something. I don't know, he was really young. But anyway, yeah, all these members of these bands were really quite young when they started in the late 70s, early 80s time frame. And it's a very interesting story because you get to hear about, well, basically the roots of industrial music, industrial noise. And there's a lot of interviews and you know, commentary from other people that were, you know, there at the time, you know, like I can't think of his name offhand right now. It's poorly rehearsed, but the guy from White House, Boyd Rice, Douglas Pierce, of course. A lot of the figures that were all part of, you know, the post-industrial scene are all mentioned and interviewed in this book. So even if you're not necessarily the biggest fan of Coil, Current 93, Nurse with Wound, it's still a very in-depth and interesting look at you know, the early post-industrial scene and how it started in England in the late 70s, early 80s. In particular, I did enjoy the Coil, Current 93 stuff the best because, well, as I already said, I'm big fans. It was really interesting kind of hearing about David Tibet's early life and how he, you know, grew up and all that kind of things. Because he's a very fascinating individual. I've always been really, intrigued by him. I he's weird, but he's like a fun weird sort of thing, I guess, maybe. I don't know. Very eccentric, very special person, I think, and I love following him on Instagram and stuff like that nowadays too, and still seeing his eccentric writings and posts and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, so it was very interesting kind of just hearing how he got into all of his occult stuff and stuff like that in the late 70s and all that kind of stuff, and his sort of jumping around between religious interests from like very much being into Aleister Crowley stuff to moving into more like paganism and then Buddhism, then eventually settling into some form or another of Christianity, I guess, or I'm not really totally sure what David believes, but it's not typical Christian stuff, so that's good. That being said, it's a very interesting read, and it seems like in the 80s, David and anyone basically surrounded with David was doing every drug known to mankind, but mostly a lot of psychedelic drugs, and I never doubted that when listening to a lot of the 80s and even 90s recordings, but having it confirmed made it all the more clear, of course, and yeah, it was more obvious, but yeah, that was definitely a thing. I mean, especially like around the time of maybe 85, 86, like a lot of these people that were involved in, they were all living in what I guess was sort of like, I don't know, like a big, I'm trying to think of the word now, not an apartment together, but a squat maybe, so to speak. They're all kind of living in this thing together, and yeah, just total madness all the time. People were fucked up on drugs and all this shit was going on, and just it sounds really crazy and chaotic, but yeah, that's what they were doing back then. But yeah, it's you know, it's the story of Current 93, and the book kind of cuts out right around like 2000-ish, and then you know, obviously that's when it was published in early 2001, 2002 time frame then, so you only get that far. So obviously it's already a 20-year-old book. But then it's also very interesting hearing the story of Coyle, John and Peter's relationship throughout the 80s, and I didn't really know this before I read this book, but I never knew how deeply invested John and Peter were in all the occult stuff and how much fucking drugs they did too and stuff like that. It was just, seems like just insane, really. And then the unfortunate thing that John, later on in life, as he quit drugs, he then became an alcoholic, and of course, alcoholism and being drunk eventually cost him his life in 2005. Speaking of which, I think it's actually coming up on the 20th anniversary of John's passing. I'll have to look that up. That being said, their story is very interesting too. It was interesting to hear that Stephen Thrower, one of the other members of Coyle in the late 80s, he had seemed like some sort of relationship with Clive Barker, who of course is well known for the Hellraiser horror movies and stuff like that, and I guess it was Stephen and the Coyle guys that kind of introduced Clive to like a lot of, I guess, like sort of like the gay S&M bondage kind of world of stuff in the late 80s, which of course would have been very taboo back then and hard to get. And that, if you've seen Hellraiser, obviously there's a lot of this sort of, well, actually not even underlined, it's very obvious sort of S&M bondage kind of themes throughout this series. And I guess the Coyle guys were inspiration for Clive to include that in the movie, or at least they got him into it or something. I don't know. But yeah, just a little fun fact there, and yeah, it just the Coyle story, of course, is very tragic, of course, because you know, John passed away from tragic circumstances. You know, he fell to his death from being drunk and all that, and then, of course, in 2010, then Peter passed away too, of course. So, you know, the Coyle guys are, you know, their lives were cut tragically short, I think, and that's just really unfortunate, because, you know, obviously if they were still here, I'm sure they would have continued to make a lot of really amazing music. Yeah, but I mean, I don't want to give away all the details of the book, and frankly speaking, it's been about a year since I read this anyway, so it's not really that fresh in my mind. But that being said, of course, you also get the story of Nurse with Wound. It's very interesting hearing Stephen talk about the early years of Nurse with Wound and how he created the music and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But like I said, I'm not really a big Nurse with Moon fan, but nevertheless, I hung on to every word of this book. I thought it was absolutely excellent. So if you like Coil or Current 93 Nurse with Moon, definitely check this out. There's the front cover, there's the back cover. There's pictures scattered throughout the book, of course. Thankfully in color too. You don't always get that in a lot of these books. I don't know what's going on in that picture. It doesn't look good. Someone's getting their shit fucked up. It's a picture of a young John Balance. What else have we got here? Some old flyers, it looks like. Robbing Gristle. Bunch of stuff in this. A lot of really great old images, many of which I had never been seen until buying this book, so that was really awesome too. Old picture of David Tibet there, and I think John Balance as well, or John Murphy, I'm sorry. And the Anxiety. Yeah, I mean all of the old classic, industrial artists are all kind of, featured in here in some way or another. Another picture of a young John Balance. Lots of images. There's Stephen Thrower. Yeah, lots of images. So that's what I like too. There's a good chunk of pictures. I mean, keep you entertained or whatever. If you need, if the words enough aren't entertaining you, I guess. Here's some old sketches and lyrics or notes about the songs and such. Yeah, really old picture of Rose McDowell, David Tibet, and Douglas Pierce there. That was another interesting thing about this book, as I found out that it was through this book I finally found out why David Tibet and Kurt 93 stopped working together, and that was because sometime in the mid-90s when David Tibet befriended Tiny Tim had these extreme Christian views and these really homophobic views, and basically Tiny Tim told David Tibet, I guess you shouldn't be friends with homosexuals. I guess that's what he told him or something, which is fucking what an asshole, obviously. And David Tibet ultimately chose Tiny Tim over Douglas Pierce, so they never worked together. And then Tiny Tim fucking died in 1996 anyway, so whatever, fuck him. But anyway, read the book. It's really good. I really like it. If you love those bands or just want to know a little bit more about the early post-industrial scene in England, it's fucking phenomenal. England's Hidden Reverse. All right, continuing on, we're going to talk about The Psychick Bible by Genesis p-orridge. Genesis is probably one of the most fascinating human beings ever, and someone who I've known about for probably 20 years now, much like I have all these other neo-folk and other post-industrial musicians, but I never really dug into who she was and what she did throughout the years, and unfortunately she passed away back in 2020. But by most accounts, Genesis, along with Kristen Cozy and Peter Christensen, were the creators of industrial music in the late 70s under the banner of Throbbing Gristle. She then went on to form a band called Psychic TV in the early 80s, and then sort of in conjunction with Psychic TV created this, I hate to use the word cult, but I guess a lot of people would say she started a cult called the Temple of Psychic Youth, or TOPY. In this cult, they sort of explored a lot of sexuality, gender, and a lot of chaos magic, that sort of thing. A lot of occult affairs. I'm assuming probably a shit ton of drugs too. And essentially, what this book is it's basically Genesis's scriptures and writings and sort of the rituals and sort of tests you had to do to sort of get into TOPY. There's portions of this book that are hard to get through because it's just, I don't know, it's sort of, I feel like it sounds so ridiculous at times like that, I guess, maybe, if that's the way to put it. And it's just, I don't know, I guess maybe it's one of those things where you had to be there and be a part of it to totally understand it, but from this outside looking in perspective, it's like, it's really different and out there, let me tell you. The part where you had to masturbate onto something on the 23rd hour of the day and the 23rd of the month and send it to them as a sigil to get membership is one of the more interesting things, I guess. I would not have guessed that was ever a thing people did, but that was one of the things you had to do to get into the Temple of Psychick Youth back in the early 80s. It's very interesting. But yeah, a lot of this reads almost in a textbook sort of fashion at times, which is not what I really like to read. And frankly speaking, I bought this under the assumption that this was going to be more or less Genesis talking about Toppy and what transpired over the years. And you do get that in this book, but it's like, okay, so like, yeah, obviously you can see the book is pretty thick. Like this much of the book is him talking about like the actual history of the Temple of Psychick Youth, whereas the rest is just, yeah, these writings, these scriptures, these rituals, all of us explained. He talks about the Psychick cross, of course, and everything, and its resemblance to like the swastika and all this other shit, and it's a lot to take in. At times I was very fascinated and deeply involved. At other times I was just like, Jesus fucking Christ, this just, we need to move on. I had to just turn the pages. There also seems to be quite a bit of repetition throughout this book. It seems like you kind of get like the general overview of what the Temple of Psychick was about 2, maybe 3 times throughout the book. It's like it just sort of repeated. I don't know why. But that was interesting, of course, to see that and hear that. In particular, it was very distressing hearing about how in 1991, how their base of operations was basically raided by the government. And at the time, Genesis was overseas doing missionary work in Nepal with his daughters, and then he became public enemy #1, and he basically became a refugee, and then he came and lived in the United States for the rest of his life. And he never went back to England because he was, wanted basically by the government because they thought he was, I don't know, I guess something about how they thought he was like doing abortions of children and stuff like that and all this other stuff. But one of the more fascinating things sorry, I just hit the camera. One of the more fascinating things I read in this book was just how, I guess how like unbelievably like conservative and like very far right-leaning England was from like the late 70s up until, well, I don't really know how long. I mean, it was interesting reading about how like basically back in like the 80s and 90s, tattoos were basically like illegal. Same with piercings, and I think this was a lot of this was more related to like genital piercings and stuff like that. And obviously this was like an attack on the gay community because that's where a lot of that stuff centers around and has its origins. But very interesting that the governments took these extremes and were arresting people. And here we are now in the United States in 2024, and we're in the midst of wondering what's going to happen in November, and we're hoping we don't get forced into an autocracy and get ruled by a fascist dictator. Yeah. So, yeah. Anyway, I don't want to go on that soapbox. Anyway, it's an interesting read, but like I said, some of this could just really drag. It was interesting learning about it. Right after I bought this, I actually bought Jen's more autobiography called Non-Binary, and that's another thing I should probably tell is that Genesis was born male, and later on in life he transitioned to a woman. But it's not exactly that simple. In the late 90s, he met his second wife, Lady J, and they embarked on this sort of living art thing where they decided to become sort of one entity, and they had plastic surgery and all this stuff to look like one woman, basically. So Genesis looked like her, basically, after all said and was done. Lady J passed away in 2009, and then, of course, Genesis passed away in 2020, but for several years, they looked very much alike because Genesis had a shit ton of plastic surgery, or I think they both did, actually, but that was sort of it. They had this idea of they loved each other so much that they wanted to become one entity, and they called it pandrogyny, I guess, if I'm understanding it correctly, or if I'm saying it correctly. But the idea was sort of this almost, how did you say, sort of hermaphroditic kind of thing where like they were one thing, I guess, or one entity existing but two souls, so to speak, or something. I don't know, it's out there and it's different, but I mean the one thing that's got to be said about Genesis above all else is that he, then later she of course, was exploring gender and pushing the standards of normality way out there, long before anyone else dared do it, you know, and she was very open about it, and you know, I got to give her credit there for you know, that. And I mean, I think a lot of people, especially in the transgender scene, I don't honestly know if they even know her, which is tragic, really. And they should, of course, because she was a trailblazer in that scene. But yeah, I've just found her to be so fascinating. I definitely wanted to read more books about her, so maybe I'll talk about that one later on. But that aside, I'm not really a big fan of Throbbing Gristle or Psychick TV, and I know for some people that might be like blasphemous words, but I don't know, I think I still need to dive deeper into their catalog, so if anyone has any recommendations from them, that maybe there's something I've overlooked or something, let me know and I'll definitely check it out. But anyway, that's the Psychick Bible, so give it a listen, or give it a, don't listen to it, you can't listen to nothing, well maybe there's an audiobook, I don't know, but check it out, this is the Psychick Bible. Okay, this next one I mentioned in my neo-folk video like maybe a year ago or something. Actually, it's probably about time we do another neo-folk video. But anyway, before we do that, though, let's talk about the Spectrum Compendium. Spectrum magazine was an Australian-based zine wrote by Richard Stevenson between 1998 and 2002. And it largely covered the post-industrial scene at the time. So the type of music that basically he talked about was, of course, dark ambient, noise, industrial, death industrial, power electronics, neo-folk, martial industrial, I don't know, dark wave music maybe, a lot of different stuff, just a lot of that stuff that kind of falls underneath that post-industrial umbrella that I like to talk about here too. So this was a real treasure trove to get this, and my goodness, all 5 of these issues were so well wrote, and just a lot of very detailed reviews and interviews, and basically as I was going through this, you know, I was just jotting, I was reading each individual review, and I was like, wow, I never heard of this before, you know, this sounds interesting, and then I guess my whole intentions of buying this was to discover some obscure, you know, dark ambient music or whatever, and to then buy it, but money's just been kind of tight. I never really got around to it, even though I've had this book for like over a year now, I think. But with that being said, it is a very, very interesting a collection of those 5 scenes, and you get, you know, very thorough interviews, very interesting interviews with, you know, musicians across, you know, all different sides of the post-industrial underground, and very good reviews. There's lots of pictures and lots of archive photos too that Richard took, like of live events and stuff like that, and it's just, yeah, it's if you like reading zines, if you like reading old interviews, you'll really enjoy this. I personally love reading old interviews. Doesn't matter if it's 10, 20, 30 years old, 40 years old, fucking why not? I love reading old interviews. I think it's very interesting because through an interview you see a picture of an artist as they were at the time. I think it's always interesting when they talk about, you know, forthcoming releases, especially if a release they talk about never came to fruition or something like that. It's interesting when they mention something like that, and you're like, oh, well, that never happened. What happened there? So it's, I don't know. I love seeing weird stuff like that, or just, you know, it's just a break in it's different from what I'm trying to say here, but like even reading like old heavy metal interviews, like, you know, seeing like real young kids being all like, extreme and talking about the Satan and fucking killing Christians, it's really interesting to see how they were back then. Yeah, but I mean, obviously you don't see that so much with these kind of artists, but it's still, you know, you see some extreme opinions here and there. It's really interesting. But yeah, great interviews, great reviews, lots of really great pictures, and just if you're looking to find some more obscure stuff that you've probably overlooked in the past 25-ish years and more, you're definitely going to find it in the Spectrum Compendium. Richard, of course, after he stopped doing Spectrum in 2002, he would, some years later, start up the Noise Receptor Journal, I know there's also an archive of like the first 5 issues of that in a book form, but he's still currently publishing Noise Receptor, and tragically I've never bought any of those, but it's always been on my radar. It's just one of those things I've just overlooked for whatever reason, I don't know. I'm sure there's a wealth of great information in those as well, so I'll probably buy that book at some point in time too. But anyway, if you've not gotten Spectrum in your hands, oh man, you gotta get this. This is really definitely worth your time. I mean, there's just so much stuff in here. I mean, you can kind of, oh shit, I'm gonna break the damn thing. It starts out in the more simplest way. Yeah, it's cool even just like seeing old advertisements and stuff like that in some of these. There's an old interview with Malignant Records when they were still, I think, relatively new around that time frame. What we got here? The Protagonist, the Return to Protagonist, Great Martial Industrial Act. Sanctum, I used to have one of their albums. Wish I had sold it actually. Discovered an artist in here called Hazard, which I had never heard of, which was actually pretty cool. MZ412 interview. I mean, I love this old stuff. Here's some reviews. Yeah, man, it's great, especially like when you see an old review and then you're like, oh, hey, I have that sitting on the shelf, and you're like, you read the review and you feel inspired to listen to it again, stuff like that. I love that kind of, just having that sort of, I don't know, that weird sort of thing where I don't know what the hell I'm trying to say. Yeah. But, anyway, I mean, it's... oh, yeah, Middle Pillar. That was... I remember that distro so well. I used to order so much of them back in the early 2000s. I wonder whatever happened to them. But, anyway, I'm getting... This video's probably getting really long. I've just been rambling on here. Check out Spectrum Compendium. Alright, one more for this book review video here on the Inner Sanctum. I hope you've enjoyed it. This is the Abysm Zine from Crucial Blast. When I was ordering the Moonbladder cassette a few months ago, they had this on their Bandcamp, and I was like, sure, I like zines, why not? So this is what Abysm is about. Abysm, the Incomplete Crucial Blast Guide to Black Noise, Necro-Industrial, and Ambient Filth, Volume 1, A through E. The first in a series of collected writings from Adam Albright, one of the gnarliest blackened mutations from around this rotting planet. Pulled from the Crucial Blast archives, these writings range from 1999 to 2023. Albright collates over 2 decades of reviews and short essays on the likes of Abruptum, Demonologist, Emmet, Adder Lady, Agast, Blue Sabbath, Black Cheer, and even more obscure denizens of the sub-necro underground, so on and so forth. So I bought this blindly, just assuming it was a normal zine that was going to have archive interviews and all that kind of stuff, and it's not exactly what you get. It's all reviews, and it's formatted in a way where it's just, well, as the title sort of suggests, it just collects all of these reviews that were wrote. And frankly speaking, I'm not sure what these the origins of these reviews are. I don't know if like he had a zine or something at some point, or if it was a digital zine, e-zine, as I did myself many years ago. This is just a collection of those reviews. I don't really know. And again, much like the Spectrum Compendium, there's a lot of artists in here I'd never heard of, and I was like, holy shit, this is awesome, I gotta look it up. But as I said earlier also, money is a little tight over here, so I haven't really done that, but hopefully someday. But it's just, in some cases, like you get page after page of like the same artist being reviewed, and I get it, it's all like for archive purposes. Like here you see this band, Blue Sabbath, Black Cheer, just the whole entire page is reviews of them, and I mean, I don't know, it was interesting reading about them, but I never fucking heard of it, so, you know, I don't know. I was really hoping there would be more interviews in here, and there's none, so that was kind of a letdown. Maybe a future volume as well, that'd be awesome, but we'll see. There's some artwork in here too, which is cool. But yeah, mostly just a lot of text, and I mean, I don't know, this thing was like $8, so it's not like any big loss or anything. And that being said, I mean, well, it's not a loss at all, because there was quite a few informative reviews in here. It's definitely stuff I want to follow up with in the future, or look it up online or something like that. But you know, it just wasn't exactly what I thought it was. But maybe if you really like reading reviews, you will get a lot out of this. I don't know. But anyway, I guess you get the you get the idea. It's just a lot of reviews, a lot of reviews, a lot of reviews, a lot of reviews, a lot of rated reviews. Get the Abysm Zine. You'll love it. That being said, thank you for watching this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. As always, like, share, comment. If you have other post-industrial book recommendations, please, I would love to hear what they are. I noticed a lot of this stuff you can actually buy from like Amazon, stuff like that, and I'm not really big on supporting big companies like that, but my wife has the fucking Amazon Prime account anyway, so I'll take advantage of it myself, I guess, right? Yeah. That being said, if you enjoyed this video, do your thing. If you want to say thanks, hit the thanks button down below. If you want to check out my music and buy something there, you're helping me, you're helping my record label, Be Fallen Sounds Productions, and you're, I guess, making this video a little more worthwhile for me, because if you throw a couple bucks at me. If you don't, that's fine too. I do this out of love and passion, because I love this stuff, and hope that people watch it. Anyway, thanks again. See you later. Bye.